60 days, no closed deals. I'm sitting across from this rep that I was hired to coach, and in my head, I've already written the ending. He's the problem. The pits in my stomach, that urge to walk out and just tell the CEO, cut him, he's tanking the business. Then he says, I'm worried about fulfillment. Not, I can't sell. He says, I don't think we can handle one more client. And that's the moment. If I demand effort without understanding the constraint, I'm not leading. I'm just reacting. This episode is the move that saved it. Diagnose before you demand. Welcome to Calm Under Quota. This is the show for sales leaders, closers, managers, founders, anyone who's felt that pressure spike when the numbers slip and suddenly everyone wants answers. Not motivational answers, real ones. This show exists because leadership isn't proved when everything's going well. It's proved when it's not. When the scoreboard gets loud, when your team gets weird, when your brain starts running worst case scenarios, and you're tempted to lead from anxiety instead of reason. I'm Stephen Worley. I'm a husband, father, former Army Ranger, ultramarathon runner, founder of Closable.ai, and your host. This episode is called Diagnose Before You Demand. Here's the leadership question for today. When results slip, how does a Stoic sales leader respond? By diagnosing reality first, reducing uncertainty, clarifying causes, getting specific, instead of leaning on louder pressure and generic do more demands. And let me be clear about what this is not. This is not an excuse. This is not about just being nice. This is not lowering standards because you want to be liked. This is about tightening the quality of your questions before you tighten expectations. Because if you demand more before you diagnose, you can easily demand the wrong thing. And then you're not leading, you're just adding noise. All right, let's get into the scene that I started with. I was meeting with a rep I'd been hired to coach who hadn't closed a deal in 60 days. 60 days is a long time, long enough that everybody around them starts building a story. The CEO had a story, the team had a story, the rep definitely has a story, and I walk in already leaning toward my story. That's the honest part. We sit down and pretty quickly he tells me he's worried about fulfillment. He's basically saying, I'm not pushing deals to close because I'm not sure we can even handle them. The second he says it, my body reacts, right? I get the pit in my stomach, not because I'm mad at him, because I'm scared. I'm thinking, oh no, if this is real, this is much bigger than a sales problem. And immediately, my first story shows up. The rep and the company aren't aligned on what matters because I can't help here. Maybe he's the problem. Maybe this is one of those situations where the answer is just replacement. Then the urge hits. That hot, confident, totally unhelpful urge. I want to tell him, you are single-handedly tanking this business. I want to walk straight to the CEO and say, fire him. That would feel clean. It would feel decisive. It would also be me reacting to an impression and pretending it's a fact. So here's the choice point. I can demand or I can diagnose. I can give him a speech about responsibility, urgency, standards, effort, or I can get curious about what's actually true. I chose the harder move. I slowed down and I asked him 3 questions. I want you to hear how plain they are because that's really the whole point. I said, what's your split right now between ops and sales? Then, what have your conversations with the CEO looked like around this? And then, what breaks in ops if you close one more client? 2 things happened. 1, he relaxed a little. I wasn't attacking him. I wasn't doing what he expected, which was pressure and judgment. And 2, we got to the truth faster. Here's what I learned. The rep wasn't just selling. He was also carrying real weight on the ops and fulfillment side. He wasn't helping out. He was in the delivery weeds. He was running the team. He was backed up, and in his mind, closing another client wasn't a win, it was a threat, because he didn't think he could survive one more. So while he wasn't tanking deals, he wasn't pushing them forward either. Not because he hated the job, not because he didn't care, not because he didn't get along with the CEO. They actually had a great relationship. Because his internal math was, if I close this, we break. And if we break, I'm the one who suffers. That's the constraint. It's a real one. So we stopped pretending it was a motivation issue. We treated it like it actually was. A role design problem and a capacity problem. So I worked with the owner to get this rep prioritized towards sales. We clarified responsibilities. We reduced the load on ops. We created breathing room. And within a couple of weeks, deals started closing again. Now here's the honest line. I was afraid. After I heard the rep's side, I wasn't sure I could help. Because if fulfillment really was the constraint, you can't sales coach your way out of that, right? But once we saw it clearly, the path got obvious. The revenue from closing would provide the cash flow to invest more into ops, and the tension resolved. Here's what I want to land, because it's really the whole episode. I wanted to tell the CEO to fire this guy, but because the move was to understand his reasoning, fix the real blocker, and train him up to close more deals. That's diagnosis before you demand. Here's what most leaders do in that situation. They see 60 days, no closes, and they go straight to volume. More dials, more outreach, more pipeline, more pressure. They start threatening targets. They send team-wide messages that's basically step it up. In fact, that was already happening before I got there. And maybe that works for a day, but most of the time, it doesn't fix the constraint. It just makes the room louder, and it increases a lot of tension. The reason leaders do it is simple. Pressure feels like action, and diagnosis feels like delay. But pressure without diagnosis is how you punish symptoms. And symptoms don't care how loud you are. They care what's actually causing them. So let's put a Stoic lens on this. Epictetus is going to be my anchor for this episode. He has gone through one of the worst lives you can imagine. He was a slave. If you know anything about Epictetus, his life is not one that anyone would really wish upon themselves. Yet he maintains an impressive life philosophy. So there's a line from the first Discourses book in 18, verse 4 that goes, "Show them where they've gone wrong, and you'll see them desist from their mistakes. If they don't see what you're getting at, they remain bogged down in their mistaken beliefs." That's what happened here. This rep wasn't waking up trying to hurt the company. He was acting from a belief that made sense to him. If I close more, fulfillment breaks. This belief isn't evil. It might be wrong or incomplete or out of date, but it's coherent. So as a leader, your job isn't to win the argument. It's to surface the belief and test it. And if it's mistaken, you correct it. Not with humiliation, not with dominance, but with clarity. Now here's the guardrail, because I know this can be abused. Sometimes fulfillment is a real constraint, and sometimes it's a story we hide behind. The leader's job is to tell the difference fast. And how do you do that? It's not by a vibe, it's by questions. What's your split between ops and sales? What have your conversations with the CEO look like? What breaks if you close one more client? That's how you turn a vague excuse into concrete constraint, or expose that it's neither. This is where a lot of leaders get it wrong. They label something as a bad attitude or a bad fit, and sometimes they're right. But a lot of the time, it's bad role design, mismatched incentives, unclear ownership, capacity. And if you don't diagnose, you'll keep replacing people and keep recreating the same bottleneck. Just to be clear, diagnosis is not softness. It's precision. It's surgical. Because once you know what's real, you can set expectations that actually make sense. Here's another passage from Epictetus that hits this. This is from Book 2, 16 of Discourses, verses 21 and 22. And by the way, everything that I'm reading today, the first verse in this verse is translated by Robin Waterfield. And then, because of our lack of training, we're constantly compounding our problems and making them out to be greater than they really are. For instance, when I'm on board a ship, I peer down into the depths, or I look at the sea all around me, and with no land in sight, I become unsettled and imagine myself swallowing all that water if the ship goes down. It doesn't occur to me that 3 pints is all it takes. What is it that's disturbing me? The sea? No, my judgment. So Epictetus basically says the thing disturbing you isn't the situation, it's your judgment about it. That was me in this scene. My first judgment was huge. The rep is the problem. This is catastrophic. The business is sinking. That's the C. Diagnosis shrinks it, not by pretending it's fine, by narrowing it to what's true. What's the split between ops and sales? What conversion have already happened with the CEO? What conversations have already happened with the CEO? What breaks if one more client closes? Once we ask those, the catastrophe turn into a solvable constraint, a capacity issue, a role clarity issue, a prioritization issue. This ties directly into controlling what you can. When numbers slip, you can't control the scoreboard in the moment, but you can control your judgment. You can control the quality of your inquiry. You can control whether you turn anxiety into pressure or into questions. One of those builds clarity. The other just spreads stress. If you've led a team, you know the feeling. You see a dashboard and your brain starts writing fan fiction. Worst case scenarios. Who's failing? What it means about you. What it means about the business. The Stoic move isn't to shut down with positivity. It's to catch it, to say, that's an impression, let me test it. Because the first story in your head is usually not leadership. It's your nervous system trying to protect you. So let's name the move for you to make as a leader. Understand the full reasoning before you instruct to react. That's it. Understand the full reasoning before you demand more effort. Here's what that looks like in practice. Before you give instructions, ask for the full reasoning behind the rep's behavior, not the excuse, the reasoning. Then, separate what sits in their control from what sits in yours. They control outreach, preparation, follow-up, deal strategy. You control role design, capacity, process, tools, clarity. And then make it safe for them to surface constraints so you can fix the system instead of punishing symptoms or micromanaging. Because here's what would have happened if I'd gone with my first story. I would have pushed harder, demanded more, might have even gotten the rep fired, and the real blocker, fulfillment capacity, would still be sitting there. The business would still be stuck, just with a different person wearing the problem. So here's a quick contrast. I've had moments where I didn't do this, where I saw a number slip and went straight to pressure, and what I got was compliance theater, more activity that didn't convert, more busy that didn't produce revenue, and a team that got quieter with the truth, and an increased tension. That's the cost. When you lead from demand first, people learn to hide constraints. When you lead from diagnosis first, people surface them. Here's your practice for the week. One question I want you to sit with is, what's the full reasoning behind my rep's lack of performance from their point of view? That's the anchor. I'm going to give you a repeatable move you can run in 60 seconds before any high-pressure conversation about missed numbers. Ask yourself, what do I know factually, not what do I suspect? Then, what's the constraint here? Is it pipeline, skill, or is it something in the system? Capacity, process, role design. Then, what's their control this week? What's in mine? And finally, what's the smallest thing we could test in the next 7 days? And here's the rule. No instructions until you've answered those. Not because you're being cautious, because you're being accurate or surgical. All right, here's your standard for the team. On this team, we diagnose with evidence before we demand more effort. That's a mantra, if you will, that you want your team to have. We diagnose with evidence before we demand more effort, because demands without evidence are how you lead from stress. Diagnosis with evidence is how you lead from reason. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As a closing remark, I'll leave you with this. If you want to do this well, you need visibility, not vibes, not I think, not it feels like. You need clean insight into what's actually happening, where deals stall, where follow-ups drop, what's consistent, and what's not. That's why I built Closable.ai. It helps you reduce the guesswork around performance so you can ask better diagnostic questions instead of reacting to vague dashboards. AI enabling your team helps reps be more consistent and spend time doing what they actually love, having conversations human to human. Most reps would trade admin and tech headaches for more time communicating and helping their prospects. That's what we're trying to make possible. You can check it out at closable.ai. Here's your move. Next time you feel that pressure spike, before you send the message, before you drop the demand, before you announce the new rule, run the checklist, ask the questions, diagnose before you demand. I'll see you in the next episode of Calm Under Quota.